Connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. My name is Father Nicholas Lowe. I'm the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, Florida. And tonight I'm joined by my lovely wife and co-host, Dr. Roxanne Lowe, who's a clinical psychologist. And friends, we're so excited that you're joining us on this May 10th evening. You know, Live with the Louhs started several years ago, and our aim was to simply provide a show that marries faith and psychology to give you some practical steps so that you can grow in your own walk of faith every single week. In fact, our show broadcasts every single Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time right here on Ancient Faith Radio. You know, before we talk about tonight's really important topic, we want to encourage you to stay connected to us by joining our social media platforms. Friends, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can find us all under the headings of The Louhs, and that last name is spelled Louhs, The Louhs. In fact, our show is currently being broadcast live on our Louhs Facebook page, as well as Ancient Faith's Facebook page. And if you're listening to our show tonight and you'd like to receive a daily word of encouragement, Roxanne and I started about a year ago sending out these daily words of encouragement and inspiration each and every day, and they'll be sent to your email account. If you want to subscribe to that, please go to thelouhs.com. That's our website, thelouhs.com. Click on that subscribe button, and all you have to do is simply put your email address, and every day you'll receive a daily word of encouragement. There's no strings attached. You're not going to receive any unwanted emails. All you're going to receive every day is just hopefully a word of encouragement to guide you in your walk of faith. And if you're already receiving these words of inspiration, do us a favor. Help us to share God's light. Share them with your friends and family. Invite them to also join those daily inspirational messages. So friends, let's get started with tonight's topic. There's no doubt that one of the greatest joys we can have is being a parent, but it's also one of the most challenging. The times that our children are living in right now, friends, is extremely difficult, especially for our teenage daughters. Listen to these statistics. You know, 74% of our teenage girls feel an extraordinary amount of pressure to please everyone. 92% of our teenage girls say that if they could change the way they look, they would. 90% of everyone that has an eating disorder are young girls. Our girls are going through a lot. And here tonight, we wanted to bring someone to you that we find so inspiring, so inspirational in her own way, to talk about parenting, and specifically to parenting to our teenage daughters. Her name is Kari Kampakis, and I'm sure that many of you have heard about her or read her books. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She's an author, blogger, and national speaker from Birmingham, Alabama. It's actually where my sister lives. It's a great city. Her best-selling books for moms are Love Her Well, 10 Ways to Find Joy and Connection with Your Teenage Daughter. And these books for teen girls like 10 Ultimate Truths Girls Should Know and Liked, Whose Approval Are You Living For? Have been used widely across the country for small group studies. Kari's newest book, which we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, is called More Than a Mom, How Prioritizing Your Wellness Helps You and Your Family Thrive. It's now available everywhere books are sold. Kari's work has been featured on Focus on the Family, on the Today Show, the Huffington Post, and other national outlets. She also hosts her own podcast called The Girl Mom. Kari and her husband Harry have 4 daughters and a dog named Lola. And you can find out more about her by going to her website at karikampakis.com. Let me spell that for you. It's KariKampakis.com, or finding Kari on her Instagram and Facebook page. We do invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question for Kari, please call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can email us a question right now at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. And also share any of your comments, as we mentioned earlier, on our Louhs or Ancient Faith's Facebook page.
Well, we are so thrilled to have you on the show, Kari. We've been looking forward to this as soon as from the moment we got you scheduled. And we want to hear about every one of your books, but let's talk for a moment about Love Her Well. This is about your journey as a mom of four girls. The oldest, which is in college now, and the youngest, which I believe is 12. This is, about parenting your teenage daughter while trying to love your teenage daughters. Tell us what inspired you to write this book.
Well, thank you for having me. I have been looking forward to this interview with both of you as well. And I'm just so honored to be part of this conversation. And, the honest truth about that book is it was inspired by my mistakes because I felt like I did everything wrong as my daughters became teenagers. And I was really trying to parent them the same way I'd parented them when they were small. And it wasn't working. And the more that they resisted, or my oldest daughter started getting, acting like a teenager, and I
Mm-hmm.
would just dish it back, and all these narratives I'd heard my entire life, like, teenage girls are nightmares and you just have to survive the teenage years. I just thought, well, you know what? I've got to show them who's the boss, or these girls are going to walk all over me. And, I can look back and I see that it was my pride getting the best of me. And, we had a few months of fighting, and I kept thinking that we would get through it. And it just seemed to keep getting worse. Our relationship was changing. And then one day she went to school and we had just had a fight before school over something so dumb. I don't even remember what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just God convicted my heart that day. And I think it was just the pride was stripped away. And I just fell on the ground in my closet and cried. And I just begged God to help me restore this relationship. And I knew, I was like, I'm the adult in this relationship. She's not going to be the one to take that step. It's got to be me. And I realized that something I was doing was wrong. And so it was really that wake up call that I think a lot of moms come to. And it's God is so gracious. That's the opening story of the book. And when
Mm-hmm.
that was actually happening, I was writing these books for teenage girls. I was the so-called expert on the subject. And I just remember thinking, oh gosh, nobody can know about this. Here I am. Everybody thinks I'm an expert on teenage girls and I can't even get
Mm-hmm.
along with my own daughter. But the fact that 5 years later, I would write a book about it and my experiences and what I've learned as a parent, and then also as a writer for teenage girls and meeting all these moms across the country, the fact that I would open a book with that embarrassing story and just talk
Mm-hmm.
about God's redemption and what he did in that relationship, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's just such a story of his grace. And just, we do mess up and we are figuring things out, but it's okay. We can work through these conflicts, and God is growing us as parents as we're raising our children. And, it keeps us humble. Just when we think we've got a certain season of parenting figured out, we're thrown into a new season that we've never done before. And so I just really wanted to offer a book of hope for these moms behind me, and just the book that I wanted to have when my daughter first became a teenager, and just what I wish I'd known about helping that relationship grow up, and just parenting them as more of a guide and a mentor, and not so much as a cop as what I was doing when they were younger. But
Mm-hmm.
as we all know, like you said, it's a different world our kids are being raised in, and we've got to be the parent. We've got to set those rules and boundaries. But at the same time, that's the season of life where we really crave that deep connection. And so this was my journey of how to try to do those two things at once.
What a beautiful opening for every single mother that is listening to you right now, in that humility. And I think that's the virtue that just shined through the
Mm-hmm. I
most,
agree.
is the humility to look up and say, God, I need you to restore this relationship. God, I need you to lead me. God, I need you to fill her spirit, my spirit, and
Mm-hmm.
to work your grace through this, because no matter how hard we work, no matter how many parenting books we read, God reminds us that we can't do it by ourselves. We are going to fumble. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter how
Yes.
educated we are. And
Yes.
Father Nicholas and I look at each other all the time, and we think the same thing. Here we're supposed to be experts, and here we're struggling in some vein of life, because that's just what you do as a human being. And that's the moment when you're brought to your knees, or you're crying in the closet, and you look up and say, oh yeah, God, I do need you, and I don't know how to do this without you. And he always completes the story better than we ever could have completed it ourselves.
Yes.
But I thank you for that opening, because I think every parent today needs to hear that every other parent is struggling. Even really good parents
Exactly.
are
Yes.
struggling.
Because it's so,
Yes.
I think too, Kari, maybe you could speak about this, is just the amount of pressure that parents are on. I mean, we were talking prior to the show about, walking into a bookstore and just seeing how many parenting books that are out there. And, you end up, maybe in an innocent way, you end up competing against other parents. You're seeing where their children are, where your children are at, how they parent, what their relationships are. And maybe just speak a little bit about just the general pressure that you're hearing through the responses to your books, as well as to your own podcasts and your shows, how much pressure truly parenting is and how much it's changed over the years.
Oh, yes, that is a great question. Like I said, my oldest daughter is 19. So, really, with her and also my 17-year-old, we didn't even have social media. And I
Mm-hmm.
look back and I think, of course, we compared ourselves to parents, but I was comparing myself to the moms in my play group, or the moms
Mm-hmm.
at the
Mm-hmm.
park. It was
Mm-hmm.
maybe 5 or 10 moms at a time. And so now, and I look back and when I was recording their first moments, when I was recording their first steps, I was doing it for myself. I wasn't trying to get the perfect video. I wasn't thinking, how's this going to look on Facebook or how many likes
Mm-hmm.
will it get? It wasn't for anybody else except for my personal pleasure. And it's just, I feel sorry for these moms behind me. Like I kind of was in both worlds. When my younger two, social media was starting to come up. But I think about these moms having babies now. It's not only that, the comparison, but just, this is why I think truth and going back to God's word and the church is so foundational because I remember going to this one website one time for moms of teenagers, and
Mm-hmm.
somebody had a problem with their daughter's roommate and they needed advice. And they got 700 comments. And so I sit there and read through these comments, and my head was
Right.
spinning
Right.
because it's like it was conflicting advice. And so I was like,
Mm-hmm.
this is why we need one central source of real truth because we're like the blind leading the blind. And
Mm-hmm.
we can give our opinions and our advice to people, but it's always
Mm-hmm.
tainted by our experiences or what we believe. And so and I just think it's so hard. It becomes so important to really go back to, okay, what did God say? What is a timeless truth that has stood the test of time for thousands of years? And I just think it's more important than ever because now there's so much information and so much advice and so many voices telling moms and parents what to do that it can get really confusing, especially if you don't have that faith foundation to really go back to when you are feeling that confused.
Amen. Exactly. You're listening to Kari Kampakis, who's right here with us on Live with the Louhs. We're so grateful that you're joining us, and we invite you to call in now if you have a question for Kari. The phone number is 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Or you can email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. Kari, you've said that as our children grow up, our relationship with them has to grow up too, and how true that is. But what changes or pivots helped your relationship with your girls? And what advice would you give to parents with raising teenagers?
Well, I think the first thing that I did wrong that I had to
Mm-hmm.
correct was I would mirror their reactions. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I've got some Italian in me. And so if they got angry or their voice started raising, I would do the same thing. I would match it. And, that can make the anger escalate quickly. And so I really had to learn to just stay calm and to try to not let myself go there, which is so hard in the moment when you're
Mm.
heated because I realized that those were the moments that I would blurt out something and say something I regret. And, our kids don't forget these things that we tell them. And so that leads to my next point is that when we do say these hurtful things or something that we regret, to go back, to circle back around and apologize. And that was something I really had to learn as a mom because, I had a great family upbringing, but, we had 5 kids in my family. I was number 4. So I was kind of scrappy, and I
Mm-hmm.
think back to my childhood dynamics. I was like, when we got in a fight as siblings, when my sisters and I got into a fight, we just wouldn't talk for 3 days, and then it's like when we started talking again, the fight was over, but it wasn't really over because you still carry that grudge or that memory.
Mm-hmm.
But I never learned to apologize. And I think that, really hurt. That played into the pride that I brought into all my relationships. And so, and as my girls became older, I have it in my head, well, I've got 4 daughters. I've got to be this perfect role model. I can't admit that I'm wrong or else I'm going to undermine my
Mm.
credibility. But what happens as your kids get older is you don't have to, I mean, they see it, they see your
Mm-hmm.
flaws.
Mm-hmm.
They know when you're wrong. They know when you made a mistake and they'll call you out on it. And if you don't own it, you're going to lose credibility because they don't trust you. So the biggest surprise to me was when we do circle back around, when we do say, I am so sorry. I lost my temper. I yelled at you. I should not have done that. Can we do this
Mm-hmm.
again? And I love you so much. Just going back to repair it. I just think that is so foundational. And that was something I really had to learn because I saw that these old dynamics I'd always lived with were really hurting that relationship as my girls grew up.
Mm.
I love what you're pointing out just about our own family histories too, and just sort of informing our ways as parents. If we can't practice a tool that we were never experienced at giving or using.
Right.
And
Right.
I think how often, back in the days, it wasn't so popular for parents to apologize to their children. In the age of children should be seen and not heard. I mean, it would be unfathomable to think of a parent turning to their child and saying, I'm so sorry that I lost my temper. And so those aren't things that most of this generation even witnessed in the parent level, much less even as siblings. Like you said, we sometimes role model that even when we're in a fight, we just sort of move on and never really learned how to kind of come to each other and repair and state what we regretted about the incident.
Well, Kari, how was your daughter's initial response to when you did say that?
Yes. Well, and that's probably one of the best parts of the story. So what happened after my wake up call on the closet floor, I went to the
Mm-hmm.
gym that day, and God in his mercy, you can see his hand in the situation. I
Mm-hmm.
saw a good friend of mine who I trust. She's got a daughter a little bit older, so I always go to her for advice. And I was like, okay, what do you do when you and your daughter fight? Well, first of all, do you and your daughter fight? She's like, yes, of course we do. And I'm like, what do
Mm-hmm.
you do afterwards? She goes, you got to circle back around. So she was one that told me that. So she's like, go back and say you're sorry. And just, when you're calmer and in a better place. So when my daughter came home that day, I'd prayed. I was like, God, give me the words, help me to have this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
just help me to do something, make it better rather than make the situation
Mm-hmm.
worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I apologized to my daughter, and I was like, I'm sorry. And then I told her, I was like, I really don't like all this fighting we've had. It makes me sad because I love you so much. And I miss how close we used to be. And it kind of brought her guard down, and she's like, I know, I miss that too. And so then I asked her too, I was like, am I doing something to create this gulf between us? And honestly, in my pride, I thought she would say, oh, no, mom, you're perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But, that was what I was hoping
That
to
would be
hear.
great if they always said
Wouldn't
that.
that be so
Yeah,
beautiful?
exactly. I was like, surely I'm not, but I'm just going to throw this question out there to
Right.
sound like a good mom. And
Mm-hmm.
she's like, actually, you've been more critical of me lately, and you've been harder to please. And I tell parents, I'm like, that was a punch in the gut, but
Mm-hmm.
I would take that punch any day, because that was, again, I had to go reflect on that and look at myself, and it led to a lot of soul searching. And I realized in that season, I was really being critical of myself, and I was projecting that on her, which I think is very common with mothers with daughters. I once read that sometimes we unconsciously or not, maybe expect our daughters to be a perfected version of ourselves. And, she was
Mm.
my oldest child. She had just started middle school, so I was having higher expectations of her. And so I realized that she was right. I was doing that. But now I look back, and that was really what kind of started turning the relationship around and made me just really approach it differently. And then, by the time she graduated, we were in such a strong place. And these weren't a season. It wasn't a season to survive. I felt like it was a season to finish strong and to build that foundation that she could take into her adult life. And so, I don't know. It was just, again, it's God's mercy that,
Mm.
all hope is not lost, that He can write a better story than we ever imagined. But we do first have to humble ourselves. And like y'all said, it's, sometimes we didn't see it modeled when we were growing up. That
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a thing in parenting. Intentional
Mm-hmm.
parenting wasn't a thing out there. And so we're all in new territory. But I think just giving ourselves the grace and the room to be human. And it's okay for our kids to see that we're human and we're messing up, because they're living in a world that all they see is perfection, and they're being told they have to be perfect in
Exactly.
every area. So I'm like,
Right.
we model that. Like, even as an adult, we struggle, and we have these
Mm-hmm.
weaknesses and blind spots, but that's why we need Jesus. And that's what keeps us in that place of humility, just constantly going back to Him for help. And I think that it's an opportunity for us to really use our weak moments to model that for our children.
I'm so interested in building on that moment of what she shared about being critical and hard to please, because I would say that's probably one of the most consistent pieces of feedback I get in parent adolescent relationships is
Mm-hmm.
I just wish that they'd, ask me how I'm doing instead of giving me a command on what I need to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always an expectation for me to be more, better, best in every domain, and especially in today's world. I mean, I think parents are under pressure themselves to put pressure on kids to, out of fear, out of the anxiety of them
Mm-hmm.
not being enough in some way, because society has changed expectations for kids over time.
Mm.
But
Mm-hmm.
how do you meet that mom who does have high expectations, who is fearful of, if we don't cultivate all these things and work on every dimension of who that child is, that they're going to grow up to somehow be lacking in some way, and I would be to blame. what would you say to that parent? How would they back off in terms of the expectation to cultivate all these changes in their children?
Right. I think that first we just point to all the mental health statistics of our children. And I mean, it's so important that, we are having a mental health crisis with our teenagers. And I'm always trying to think of how do we take that pressure off. But, I think they say that one out of every three adolescents now have anxiety, and most of them
Uh-huh,
are girls.
absolutely. Hmm.
And so I think that our job as parents is like it's not worth it. And that's one thing I've realized the older my kids get. And we're in a great school system, very smart kids. They're very successful. The parents are very successful, but there's a lot of pressure. I mean, everybody's, there are kids with a 4.6 or 4.7 GPA. So these kids with a 4.0 think they're dummies next to their friend. And we're like,
Right.
in a small town, you might be miss everything, but
Right.
compared to this, and then, they're champions in every sport. And so everything is it's a lot, for any teenager. And I think that as parents, it's our job to help take that pressure off. Like, okay, if you
Mhm.
love this sport, then maybe we don't need to do the AP classes. Maybe you can come down a notch and take that pressure
Mhm.
off of you and just really think about just prioritizing your health and your mental health because, ultimately, if we don't do that, they're going to end up in a bad place. And also, I think that even with myself, when I do feel anxious or fearful about the future, like if she doesn't do this, she's not going to be on this track to make this team or to get in this college. And I find myself when I'm listening to all those outside voices and letting those outside voices get into my head, I'm forgetting that God is sovereign and I'm forgetting that
Mhm.
He has a plan for these kids and nothing, even a mistake on my part, I can't ruin what He's going to do. And I think anxiety is not trusting that if they don't make the team or they don't get into that college, it's not trusting that God is going to make another path for them. So that's one thing that we've really tried to be doing with our children is like, work hard toward your goals and your dreams, but just know if you've done the work, there's nothing more you could do. You have done your part. And, it's like when you do a book, you've done your part, you put it out into the world, and then God is going to do what He's going to do with it. But,
I
feel that
love that.
relief instead of feeling that pressure of trying to make things happen. And just know if that door doesn't open, something else is going to open. And, you're going to have an even better story than you could have imagined. And those are the moments I think when our faith are built. And,
Oh,
we
100%.
realize while we can't put anything on a pedestal, and I've learned that with my kids, all these things that we put our faith in as humans, whether it's a relationship or it's your boyfriend or clothes or a team or whatever it is, like all of that can vanish overnight. But truly, like, if your child is rooted in their identity in Christ and they know their worth in Christ, then even if they lose everything, they are still going to be standing when those storms of life come. And I just don't think our kids can hear that message enough now that, if you have your faith, then you have an anchor to cling to in any storm, and it is going to be your lifesaver,
Mhm.
And
even
what a
more than your
beautiful thing.
parents. You know?
Absolutely. What
Hmm.
a beautiful thing for parents to cling to, that when they take the pressure off, they can know and trust in the path that God has created for them. And it's going to
Hmm.
work out, and it's going to work out in His way, in His time. And believe it or not, the amount of change that can take place in our children when we do let go and let Him lead is it's inconceivable. And I think that's a lesson that
Hmm.
I think parents get over and over again. So I love that you just capitalize on that.
Mhm.
So the mother-daughter relationship really is notorious for being rocky and argumentative. I mean, like you said, everybody says, we're just trying to survive these teenage years. But you talk a lot about fighting for our daughters and not with our daughters. How do moms make that transition and still be the parent?
Yes, and it's so tricky, but I think it's just remembering that you're on the same team. And sometimes when you're fighting, it doesn't feel like that. But one thing I have to remind myself of all the time is that we have an enemy. And somebody in the Greek church once told me that I think the Greek word for devil is diabolos, and it
Mhm.
means the
Hmm.
one who divides. And
Mhm.
that's what I feel like when I'm feeling tension with my daughter or my husband or my friend or whatever. Sometimes I'm like, now that I'm aware, I'm like, he wants this division. He wants
Mhm.
the fracture in the family. He wants to attack the families because what happens is, if we lose those relationships in the family, if the mothers and daughters are fighting, we lose a voice in their life. And guess what? They have 1,000 other voices they can go listen to now, not only
Mhm.
TikTok and social media, but their friends who might not be giving them the best advice. So I think that's what we really have to realize as parents is that the older our kids get, we go from a place of control to a place of influence. But to have that influence in their life, we've got to have that relationship and be that voice that they want to listen to, even if they're rolling their eyes, but they're still taking it in. And so I think to do that, we've really got to, show them that we care and not make everything a life lesson like I tend to do, but just enjoy them.
Don't we all?
You know, and sometimes I talk to moms like, I'm just fighting with my daughter, and the mom's trying so hard to work out the relationship. And I'm like, just go do something fun. Take them to get an icy, have a shallow conversation, or go on a walk. Don't even talk about your relationship. Just enjoy them as a person. And I think sometimes we forget to do that in the teenage years. And I know in my head, especially like when mine turned 16, I'm thinking it's the countdown clock. I've got 2 years left to teach them everything they need to know before they go off. And that can make us panic and really get into that mode of you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And then we just forget to enjoy them and just to build that relationship and just to figure out what they like to do and, watch the movies they like to watch. But I just think that is so important. And it's those little things that I really think can build that relationship and earn that trust and make us a person that they want to come to.
And that's so true, because how often do our kids have fun everywhere else? It's that moment where
Yes.
we're the teachers and then they're having fun every time they go with their friends. And so that classical conditioning would say home is pressure and outside of home is fun. And
Right.
so I love that moment, that visual of go get an icy with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
You're listening to Live with the Louhs. We're so grateful that you're joining us tonight. We're speaking with Kari Kampakis, the author of her brand new book, More Than a Mom, How Prioritizing Your Wellness Helps You and Your Family Thrive. It's available everywhere books are sold. And we invite you to join the conversation. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. And if you wish to just simply be anonymous, you can just simply tell the producer when you call in that you just want to remain anonymous, and she'll make sure that happens. You can also email us a question during the show at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. And there's a lot of people tuning in online. And so please feel free to share any comments in the comment line on both our Louhs and Ancient Faith's Facebook page as we're broadcasting live there. Kara, I loved how you were mentioning about the enemy. And I think it's so true that how we read in the Bible, how the mantra for the devil is to divide and conquer. And sometimes we tend to think that that wherever he is or however he's operating is in a very overt, a very obvious way. But I think sometimes as parents, what we don't realize is sometimes that when we buy into the pressure of the world itself, and that it allows division to take place within the family, then in some ways he's winning. In other words, our children live in our own, as some in the psychology world, we talk about in our subconscious. In other words, they feel what we're feeling more than what we say how we're feeling. And so because of that, when we are filled with anxiety about the future, about what's happening in the world, what's happening in the news, what's happening in their academic life, and what they're going to accomplish and what struggles they may have, that our children are also feeding off of that. And it also ends up creating a level of tension, as you mentioned earlier. And I think as parents, maybe you could speak about this, is I love how you, in every answer that you're responding to these questions, that you talk about how grounded you are in Christ. And I think having that faith, and how would you say how your faith has helped you not only give a mirror, as the book of James talks about, being that mirror that we look at and not forgetting what we're called to look like in the eyes of Christ around our children, but also how has it helped you grounded within the family, especially in your own spiritual walk of faith?
Oh, I mean, I couldn't do life without it. And I think I feel like my biggest decade of spiritual growth has really been this decade that I'm in. I'm 49. My husband and I are about to turn 50. And, I grew up Catholic. I went to church my entire life. And so I grew up a Christian. I never did not believe in God, but I feel like it didn't really take off until my 40s. And there was a year as a family, and it started when we had a tree fall in our house, and it was a nightmare. I mean, we had to move out. This tree fell during a storm. We just moved into the house 10 days earlier. We were completely unpacked. I had pictures on the wall. I was like, I'm not ever moving from this house. It's my forever home. And then bam, this tree falls. And so anyway, we were in a rental house. It was just a chaotic year. My husband started commuting. And so I was over all the renovations. I had these 4 little girls. I had this big construction project I was not planning on. And I've never felt so overwhelmed in my life. And I just felt like I had no control over anything. And then in that same year, I have 2 daughters with food allergies, but one of my daughters had an anaphylactic reaction to hummus. We didn't know she was allergic to sesame. And
Wow.
it was just one of those moments, like it brings me chills just remembering that night. And so, we luckily, thank you, God, that the EpiPen worked that night. But that was the first moment that brought me to my knees. And then a few months
Mm.
later, I had another daughter. She was crawling on this chest, and somehow the chest fell on top of her, and this glass broke all around her. And my
Oh,
husband is the calmest person in the world. And I just heard him go in this room, and he's like, he was freaking out. And it's just, I've never heard him
Mm.
sound so worried and concerned. And I was like, it must be bad. And so he gets that chest off of her, and she's like all balled up. And I'm just ready for glass to be poking out of her entire body. And
Mm.
we open her up, and I think she had a little cut on her wrist. You could barely see it. And it was truly just a miracle. And those
wow.
moments, I guess, brought me to my knees. And I think what I realized was like, here I am going along with my daily world. And after you have a moment like that with your child, and you were just thanking God the next day and just,
Mm.
asking him, like, I mean, what can I do for you? But I
Mhm.
didn't like how different my faith looked after a scare like that versus before a scare like that. And I think that
Mhm.
was my wake up call. Like, why do I don't think I need God until something like that happens. And I realize how
Mm.
helpless I am. And so again, it's such a testimony that it really is in those moments. So we're on our knees, that it really grows our faith. And so it was interesting because I was writing fiction at the time, and it even changed what I was writing. I started writing more, Christian articles, nonfiction, and it just changed me as a person. And so I think that, and even with my children, I think what's really grown my faith are the hard things that they've gone through when I'm on my knees, and nobody else can help you except God. And one thing I've learned to do that helps me, because I do have so much anxiety in parenting, is just sometimes I just have to thank him in advance. I just have to say, I am so scared and I'm so worried, but I am thanking you in advance for your plans for my child, because I know they are good, and I'm trusting you in advance. And that just puts my heart in the right place. And it just helps me just say, I'm giving this burden to you. And there's just so much peace in that. And like I said, I think I had all this anxiety growing up, except we didn't have a name for it back then. But I see it in
Mm.
myself
Mm.
now, and I can relate to all these teenagers who have it. And that's my big message to the teenagers, is like, don't just live with it. Don't think this is just who I am, because it's
Mm-hmm.
only going to get worse as you get older. And just know that God didn't create us to live that way. He wants us to live fully and freely. And so really work through those issues. But I have found that, I've tried everything to help my anxiety, to find that peace, and nothing brings me that same kind of peace as my faith. And even when the pandemic hit, because you're all of a sudden you're imagining these worst case scenarios. But
Of course.
as Christians, we believe, like, okay, worst case scenario, we leave this earth and we go to our eternal home in heaven. I mean,
Mhm. Mhm.
and we
Mhm.
know the best is yet to come. And we know that God is going to win this war of this battle, spiritual battle of good versus
Mm-hmm.
evil. We know how it's going to end. And I just think we have that beautiful gift in our faith. And so I just so desperately want to share that with others, because it's brought me so much peace in my life and my parenting, just unlike anything else.
It's got to be that foundation, because otherwise, you're right. What resets the heart, and what gives us the framework for how to think through our fears, for how to feel through our fears, and really how to do life, with the things that we can't control. And it is those life altering moments. I know Father and I have shared multiple moments like that, and those were the moments that you do think your faith is so raw that next day, and everything
Mm-hmm.
is about Him, and life slows down, and everything becomes, your priorities change, and then, yeah, you want to hold on to that, at times where there's not an earth shattering moment, you want to hold on to that. But I do think those are important resets for us to kind of remind us that, hey, that's kind of how we're supposed to be all the time, and something to strive for. But you
Yes.
talk, in the chapter, Be Her Mom, you share this quote from a youth pastor. And the quote reads, "We're not parenting for our 16-year-old to like us. We're parenting for our 40-year-old to respect us." And so let's unpack that for a minute, and talk about what that means.
Yes, I think that my friend Sissy Goff, she's a counselor in Nashville, and they wrote about this one time, that the generation of parents that raised us, there was a lot of rules, but always wasn't necessarily the relationship there. And so, our generation of parent has kind of swung the other way, and so sometimes parents focus so much on the relationship, but they let the rules go.
Mm.
And I think especially in the teenage years, is we want to have that relationship. We want them to open up to us. And you hear parents say, if you don't, if you're too strict, if you give them too many rules, and they'll just sneak behind your back and they'll lie to you. And so, some parents, it's easy to be too lenient, just to be, their friends, because that way they'll be honest with you and tell you everything. And so, but they need both. They need the rules, and they also need the relationship. And, one thing I've realized is like, if I'm not giving them the rules, if I'm not willing to do the hard job of being the mom, then who is going to do that? And who's going to look out for their long-term well-being? But, I have friends who are psychologists and therapists. And, one was telling me the other day that, yeah, this mom brought her daughter in to see me. She's like, I can't fix her with the phone. So I need you to work on that with her. And so she was like, I was trying to think of a polite way to tell her that basically that's your job as a mom, is to set those boundaries. Like, don't make me the bad guy. And I think that as parents, we don't want to be the bad guy. And usually as moms, we're the ones having to do all that. We're the ones there every day, present, having to set the rules and have them mad at you because their rules are different than their friends' rules or whatever. But I think it goes back again that we've got to just, really know that we're trying to please God, not your teenager. And if you are truly trying to please him and truly trying to raise them to be the adult he wants them to be, that there's going to be that tension sometime. And it's so important for us to remember that, the teenage brain is only 80% developed. I read the book, The Teenage Brain, and it was pretty fascinating. And, the last part to develop is the prefrontal cortex, which is the center of reasoning and logic and impulse control. So basically, parents are supposed to fill in that gap, that other 20%, until the brain is developed. And so sometimes you are making these decisions when your kids are teenagers and they won't understand it, or they'll kick and they'll fight. But, think about how do you want them to look at that situation when they're 40 years old and they suddenly look back? And, an example of this is I talked to this guy. He was a baseball coach, a high school baseball coach. And he's like, it was really interesting. I got a phone call a few years ago from one of my former players that's now in his 30s. And he's a very successful businessman, a very wealthy entrepreneur. But he said when he was a junior in high school, we did drug testing and he had drugs in his system. So I kicked him off the baseball team. But years later, he called this baseball coach and he thanked him for doing that, because he's like, that action was what made me get my act together. It's what made me stop doing drugs and get my act together. And I wouldn't be where I am now had that not happened. And I just think that's such an illustration that, and again, it goes back to trusting God. I have another friend, her son wanted to go to a university. He's very social. She knows her son. He loves people, makes friends easily. He wanted to go to a very social university that's kind of known for partying. She's a single mom. Her ex-husband was going through rehab at the time, so she was doing this by herself. And so she told her son, okay, you can go to the community college in that town and let's just test it out and see if you're ready for it. So she said she let him do that. And 6 weeks into it, he got a DUI. And so she's like, that's it, come home. And I was proud for her. I was like, that's a hard call, because a lot of people wouldn't take that action. But she's like, you broke my trust. He was not happy about it. She was dating a guy who had a painting company at the time. So he started working for her boyfriend. He hated it at first, but he started taking some classes locally. He found out he was pretty good at painting, kept doing it for a few years. He ended up starting his own painting business. He got several crews. He met his future wife while he was in school here in town. They got married. He now has this very successful painting business with 10 crews in 2 different cities. And it's interesting to me, like that started with a DUI, and it's such a testimony. But had the mom, I think that's why we really got to rely on God. Like, okay, what do you want me to do? My child is off the rails, or they're making some terrible decisions. And not every teenager is going to make such drastic decisions. But I think it's just an example of like, don't be scared to do what is best for them long term that they can't see yet, that they need. And, priest told me one time that love wants what's best for a person long term. It's not just trying to make them happy today. It's thinking about their future. And so I think our kids can't always see their future like we can. And that's one thing that we can do as parents. But again, it's hard. It's hard in the moment, especially when they're mad at you.
So you're listening to Live with the Louhs right here on Ancient Faith Radio, and we are speaking with Kari Kampakis, author of several books. The book is Love Her Well, 10 Ways to Find Joy and Connection with Your Teenage Daughter. She also has a new book that has just come out called More Than a Mom, How Prioritizing Your Wellness helps you find you and your family thrive. And she's given us such wisdom, and we're just enjoying this conversation so much, Kari. Let's talk a little bit about society and how they kind of breed this sort of division, as you called it, and they kind of almost give us almost an anxiety about entering these teenage years. And you've talked before about it's known as the season to survive. Adolescence is known as the season to just survive, and most parents don't think they're really going to thrive in it. But you really challenge moms to aim higher than this, to see it as a season to finish strong. And since our kids are only under our roof for 18 years, our longest relationship, that one might last 50 or 60 years, it is the friendship that happens after they leave the home. And their last years at home set the stage for that. So, can we talk a little bit more about this, about how to finish strong in this relationship?
hmm I think, the first part of that is just the conflict resolution. Like, find, get your rhythm in resolving conflict. And one thing that really helped me and inspired me to try to help do this well with my daughters was, I think it was America's top couples therapist. I think his name is John Gottman. But I read an
Hmm.
article that he said the number one predictor of whether a marriage will survive or a marriage will be healthy and thrive is how well the couple can resolve conflict. And
Hmm.
so I started thinking, okay, what safer place to practice this than in a parent-child relationship? They're if they
Mm-hmm.
say the wrong thing, they're not going to lose our love like they might with their friend. And it just hit me. I was like, if we teach them how to resolve conflict, if we work through it in our relationship, it's going to help them when they go to work. It's going to help them in their marriage. It's going to help them have
Hmm.
better friendships. And so really, and a lot of that is when you do have an argument or you're having that relationship with your child and they tell you, Mom, it drives me crazy when you do this. And so sometimes it is these things we have to work on ourselves. Like, okay, I'm not going to be so direct or so blunt. I'm not going to nag you as much. I'm going to be more careful with my words. I think that sometimes these little things we do, it's going to set up a better dynamic. And again, make it more of an enjoyable relationship. And I keep thinking, one day my daughters will have the choice of whether they want to come home or go somewhere else. And I want them to go home. And we all hear stories that people with their mothers, it's one way or the other. They either dread going home because
Hmm.
their mom's going to nag them or criticize them or whatever it is, or they're so excited. And so I think we've got to really just keep that in mind that as they get older, they drive that boat. And so really trying to use these final years at home and, saying,
Mm-hmm.
am I doing something that's hurting this relationship? And with different children, it might be different things, right? Because they have different needs and different love languages. And so it's
Hmm.
really trying to understand each child and, like I said, build that foundation that you can carry into the long-term adult friendship.
Mm-hmm.
Carrie, we've got a question that's come in. We've actually had several questions come in via email and Facebook. And I'm going to start off with this question. And the writer says, what do you do when your 15-year-old gives you the eye roll, the big sighs, the okay, mom, the dismissive and invalidating
Mm-hmm.
responses right back to you? How do you handle that as a mom trying to, thrive in the teenage years and create a season to finish strong?
Yes, I think the biggest thing is we need a lot of inner strength in that season.
Hmm.
Something like that. Instead, it's easy to just get offended and sad, but maybe even laugh a little bit and smile, say, I love you, you know,
Hmm.
maybe even kind of lighten the mood, even if they are rolling their eyes or doing whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
just not letting that affect us, us just be like, I love you. I know, you're taking it in. You may not look like it, but I know you're taking it in. Just to kind of lighten the mood. My
Mm-hmm.
brother is so good at this, and he's really good at just lightening the mood. Sometimes it's a little comment or a smile that can kind of diffuse the situation. But my
Mm-hmm.
other big thing, and I think this is one of the biggest pieces of advice I'd give any parent behind me, is that you have got to have your adult village in the teenage years. I feel like we know we need our village when our kids are little. You got all the mom
Mm-hmm.
groups and everybody's changing each other's babies' diapers, and it's like we're all in it together. And then as you get in that sweet spot of parenting, the kids grow up, they're self sufficient, they're under your roof, and they have friends over, but you don't see them for 5 hours, and it's just nice and
Mm-hmm.
easy. And so you kind of, I remember thinking, I don't really need my friends then. I'm so happy with my family. My husband's my best friend. We're good. And then you get into the teenage years and it's hard and you're not always getting that love and reciprocation back. And the one thing I tell myself over and over, and I've learned is that we're called to love our children like God loves us. And it's a great
Mm-hmm.
lesson in God's love for us that He pursues our heart and He loves us regardless of whether we're loving Him back. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and He does it over and over. And, usually once we're aware of that, you can't help but love them back. And I think that's our job as parents is just to keep loving them, to keep planting those seeds. But I think what we've got to do as parents is we've got to be getting love in our life because you might not be getting it from your child like you did when they were little, but they're taking it in and they need that from you. But that's why they love, if you're married, from your spouse or your friends or your therapist or your parents, just those people who build you up, those friends who cheer you on. And they say, I know your child might not appreciate that you're spending all this time planning this party for them, but I see what you're doing. I know this labor of love, what you're doing for them. and you're an amazing mom, and just really building each other up in that adult village so that we can go back and love our children and do what we're called to do, and not rely on them, not
I
rely on their
just love
reaction
that.
to
I
give us the
love that. To
affirmation.
remember that we are called to love our children the way God loves us and to
Hmm.
pursue the heart. Because, again, what is underneath every moment of the sigh or the dismissive response is just feelings they don't yet know how to communicate well.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And I think if we can attach to the heart and remember to pursue their heart underneath that, I love the way you said that. It does sort of remind us of the goodness of who they are and their own vulnerabilities, and it makes it easier to love them, and
Hmm.
not to get so caught up. Because I think you coined it earlier when you said mirroring their reactions. So often, when they give us a disrespectful remark, we mirror that with some sort of escalating disrespectful remark,
Hmm.
and it just builds
Hmm.
this
Right.
negative sentiment. And very quickly, I find that those situations spiral because no
Hmm.
one's frontal lobe is working, even with our adult brains, as developed as they are, no
Hmm.
one's frontal
Yes.
lobe is working very efficiently. And so I love that, to remember to pursue their heart and love them like God loves us. I mean, he never gives up on us and never gives us those vindictive
That's right.
responses, no matter what kinds of things we told him when he was
Hmm.
walking around on this earth. Um,
Right.
so, what encouragement would you give to a parent who's struggling with their teen right now?
Hmm.
Yes. I think what moms need to hear most is that you are so unbelievably and unconditionally loved by God. And just to really sit with that and to rest in that and to open up your heart to that. Because I just, especially now that I'm writing for moms and I'm hearing their struggles and their worries. And I'm like, this is the one place in life where we don't want to fail. And we're so scared that we are failing in some
Hmm.
way. And, every woman I know, like I said, we talked about it earlier, that she could do 200 things right in a day. She picks up the carpool, she goes to the grocery store, she does the laundry, she does everything. And yet, when she goes to bed at night, she's fixating on those two or three things that she feels like she got wrong, and she's blaming herself. And so I'm convinced that God created us to parent with a spirit of strength and not defeat. And I think so often we get stuck in that defeat and that regret or what we wish we'd done differently. And again, that's where the enemy, I feel like, can really get in and make us feel like we've ruined it all. Our kids are ruined. It's all of our
Hmm.
fault. And
Hmm.
so, the only thing that can counter that is God's truth and just knowing that, wow, I did mess up, but he still loves me. Or like my family's mad at me or they don't understand me, but he gets me. And I had something a few weeks ago. I don't remember what it was, but it was just a hard day. I think somebody was mad at me. And I just was like, I'm just threw myself on my bed. I'm like, God, I just want to feel your love for me, because you know my
Hmm.
heart, you know
Mm-hmm.
how hard I'm trying. And nobody knows that like him. And I just don't think we do that enough as moms. It's just really, like I said, sit with that and just feel the enormity of his love. And just, even when we do get it wrong, but he's equipping us and he's empowering us. And I think when we can really believe that we're as loved as we are, it's going to affect all of our other relationships too.
And Carrie, we have another email question that just came in. And the writer says, what do you do when you disagree with your daughter on far too many things? I'm known as the strict mom in the group, and we argue about everything from social media to who she can spend time with. And, you know, the writer says, I don't really know. She's starting to doubt herself. What do I do when
Mm,
I'm starting to question my very own values because everything is a battle? Do you give up? Do you
mm.
give in? What do you do?
Yeah, that's good. I think we do as parents, we have to pick our battles. And so really focus on like, okay, what is most important to me? Where can I
Hmm.
give
Hmm.
her a little, where can I give her a little slack and let her know that I'm trying, that I don't want to keep fighting like this, that I'm giving a little bit on my end, maybe she can on her end too. And I do think too, I've learned this with parenting, that it's hard as they grow up because, like I said, we lose that control. And so sometimes we're trying to still control things in their life, and that's going to push them away. And so really think about, okay, how can I influence this rather than control it? And so obviously, like if she's hanging around friends who are terrible influences, that, that might need to be more of a direct conversation. But, I think that sometimes we tell them that maybe you need to be friends with this group or not be friends with this person. And we have to be careful the way we approach that. And sometimes I think there's ways to do it without being so direct. But I remember one time I said something to my daughter, and it was about a friend that she had, and the friend was not making some great choices, and she got mad, and she just popped up as soon as I started talking about her friend. And, and I realized, I thought about it later. I'm like, if she started talking about my friend, I'd be defensive too. I would pop
Mm.
up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just turned the tables. I'm like, ooh, I shouldn't have said it like that. Like maybe there was a better way to say it, just to really be intentional with our words and think about, is this something that's going to go well? And so, I did something last night, and we are talking to the moms that, say they're in a friend group, or say there's something going on. I think it's easier to have those conversations before it's an issue. It's easier to talk about dating before they're dating someone, because if you talk about when they're dating someone, they're going to blush and shut down and they're so embarrassed. But
Mm-hmm.
so, if they're in a friend group, or they're in a friend group, or something's going on, maybe instead of just talking directly about that, sometimes we just share. I share stories from my life all the time. And so it might be, think about, oh, y'all know what I was thinking about the other day, this friendship that I had in high school. And I didn't realize it was kind of a toxic friendship. But just, I may even pray for God to give you, and God will do it. Think about, what's a story from my life that mirrors this story from her life, and what I learned about how to choose better friends, or how I learned this group was not the group for me. And how can I maybe tell that story? What's an opportune time to tell that story? And just pray for God, just, I've got the story in my pocket. So just tell me when the time is right to share it. And so I think sometimes that just makes them less defensive. It's getting your point across. It's teaching that value you want to teach, what a good friend does, but you're not coming out and attacking something about their life, and I do think if they feel like we're attacking everything then at one time, then it can be overwhelming. But again, I know, because I've been there too. And so the other thing I think about too is, my dad, one time I was worried about something with my kids, and he was like, why are you worried about that? Like, that will not matter in 6 months. And he goes, there's only 2 things you really have to worry about with your kids. The first is their relationship with God, and the second thing is their health. And he's like, if you get those 2 things right, everything else falls into place. And that just really helped me, because I'm like, okay, so their faith matters, and then their health, and that's their mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional health. And so, just really prioritizing those things. And so, even in relationships, teaching them. And a dad told me this. I love that he tells his daughters, if a boy ever tries to come between you and God, he wasn't sent by God. And I just think that's so
That's
good.
beautiful.
Like anybody who's good for you. So just having these conversations, you're not attacking their friends, but we're just going to talk about, I read this today, or I saw this article today, and saw, or I heard this on a radio show today, that if a boy ever tries to come between you and God, he wasn't sent by God. And you know what? That applies to friendship too. And, one thing I talk about in my friendship speech with girls is that, the good people, the people who are the good influences in your life, are going to draw you closer to the people who love you most, like your family and your best friends. And somebody who's not a good influence is going to create division in your closest relationships. They'll make you fight more with your parents. They'll make you lie to your parents. It's going to create, they'll talk about your little brother, they're going to criticize your family. And so I think sometimes, instead of attacking a certain person, we can just share these general lessons. It makes it get a little bit more digestible for our teenagers.
Absolutely. What great feedback. I love that.
It's just so filled with wisdom, Kari. If you're just tuning in right now, we're speaking with Kari Kampakis, who is the author of a multitude of best-selling books, by the way. The one that we're highlighting today is called More Than a Mom, How Prioritizing Your Wellness Helps You and Your Family Thrive. I know we only have a few minutes left of our show, but I do want to encourage all of you, our listeners, to go to Kari's website. It's karikampakis.com. That's KariKampakis, karikampakis.com. You can also find her on Instagram and on Facebook. And just if you're looking again for some encouragement with parenting, definitely like her pages. They're just filled with so much knowledge. I know that Roxanne and I personally benefited from the information that she shares on her platform. So again, go to her website, karikampakis.com. Also find her on her social media accounts on Instagram as well as on Facebook. And we just have a few more moments left in the show, Kari. I wanted to kind of get to just some final questions. One is, you talk about protecting your teenagers' privacy, because if they find out that you've been talking about them, they'll shut down on you. How do parents toe the line between protecting their privacy, but also getting advice or support when they need it the most? It's a tricky balance, so maybe you could talk about that.
Yes. I've learned that I heard this one time, as your kids get older, your circle of advisors gets smaller. And so really, you really want to find the people who share your values, the people who understand your long-term goals. And so, like, I think somebody like you, Father Nick or Dr. Roxanne, I mean, you're the perfect people to go to. But
Hmm.
just really thinking, like, don't be scared to go to your priest for parenting advice, or
Hmm.
go to a counselor or psychologist for parenting advice. And that's a great place because, especially when they're rooted in biblical principles, you're going to get it from a Christian perspective, which might be different than the advice you get elsewhere. So I do think too, like I joke that when your kids are little, you can get advice anywhere. You can go to the
Hmm.
gym and tell everybody, my child is, having trouble potty training and I need help, and everybody jumps
Hmm.
in. But as they get older, if they find out you're sharing their issues or problems with somebody, they'll shut down on you.
That's so
Or,
true.
or including
They
them in the sermon story
So,
that, you know.
that's our kids say, when my name comes up in a sermon, we don't know what's about to follow.
That's right.
My
Dad,
kids
why'd
say
you have
that
to
too when I'm
say that story? It was 10 years ago,
Good
You never
wisdom for us,
know.
honey.
Yes.
That's right. And you never know what might trigger it or not. It's
Exactly
tricky.
right. It's a cute story
Yes.
for us, but not for them. That's for sure. But,
Yeah. And
um,
you're probably the same way, I think. Well, maybe in 20 years I can share this story, but not now. But this is
right.
Yep.
really good material one day.
That's
Mhm.
right. That's right. And just our final question in these last few minutes, and you've just been such a wealth of wisdom. We can't wait to have you back on. But in your newest book, More Than a Mom, which was just released in April, it's about a mom's wellness and seeing yourself beyond our role as a mom, a friend, daughter, friend, and everything that we are, all of our, I just like to call them slices of our identity pie. Um, to find your identity as a child of God, I mean, the premise is that taking care of yourself really makes you a more effective mom and helps your entire family thrive, since moms can only really take care of their children as far as they have come themselves. So, can we just say in these last few minutes a bit about mom's self care
Mhm.
in the teenage years?
Yes, I think it's crucial. And sometimes the things that our daughters need us to be strong mentors and strong guides. And so think about what's keeping me from being a strong presence in her life. And it might be, with me, I think, oh, my anxiety. My anxiety, when she's
Mhm.
anxious, my anxiety gets triggered. And so all of a sudden I'm falling to pieces. And so I've got to work on this with myself. When I have those thoughts, I've got to capture them and go replace it with a Christ-like thought. And so it's just these little things, and also our wellness, like just resting. I used to think that I didn't have a moment to rest. I had to fill up my entire day. And then, you do that for 20 years and all of a sudden you feel empty and burned out and drained.
Hmm.
And so just, it's not selfish to do these things, to just,
Right.
think about how Jesus modeled rest in the Bible before he would
Mhm.
even make these big decisions. Before choosing 12 disciples, he went to a mountaintop to pray all night and to rest. And so realizing that, when we do these healthy lifestyle rhythms that are really, that are the self-care that I think we need, it's going to make us more clear-headed, it's going to make us more patient, and just giving ourselves that grace and that time to do that, because it really is going to benefit our family by giving us that extra bandwidth we need.
I
Absolutely.
think it's so
So
important.
important.
We highlight that as well in our own. We try our best in our own lives that we all need a Sabbath. I mean, there, in the word Sabbath literally means to stop, to cease. And I think so
Mm-hmm.
often the world that we're living in, again, as we were talking about earlier with the enemy, is that I think that we kind of have bought into this lie that I think the enemy gives us, that more is better, and that we just continue to kind of be on this, this kind of like a little mouse on a wheel, just keep going and going and going. And sometimes until our children are leaving the home, or unless we're dealing with a major crisis, that we don't really realize just how important it is to simply be present with ourselves, with God, and obviously with our children. Because if you don't, if we don't insert that, the world won't do it either, and it'll just continue to perpetuate. How do you kind of
Mm-hmm.
do that in your own, like in a very practical way? Carrie, how would you like share with us like some of the ways that you find that Sabbath, that break, that alone time to kind of replenish yourself?
Yes, I'm just a type A personality by nature, and the biggest thing that's probably helped me is, I hate, and it's not that it might not be applauded by a lot of people, but I had to lower my expectations of what I can do in a day. So
Hmm.
I used to cram my calendar full. If there was a glitch, it threw everything off. And so now I'll leave it a little more. I'll leave more pockets of time. And I realize,
Hmm.
I'm never going to be one of those writers who releases a new book every year. Like I don't write fast. I can't do it. That's not me. And so it's just coming to terms knowing, like, I'm not going to live on 4 hours of sleep to meet these deadlines or to do this thing.
Hmm.
So just realizing, I think, what works for you. I think prioritizing sleep is huge, and just knowing that, okay, I've done enough for the day. It's time for me to go to bed, and I'm going to be
Mm.
more efficient tomorrow if I do get a good night's sleep. And I've had many seasons where I was not getting enough sleep, and I was grouchy and irritable and yelling.
Mm-hmm.
Season, I would be like, it's just not worth it. You learn that lesson the hard way. So just
So
that,
true.
and just taking care of your body. You realize as you get older, your body dictates what you can and can't do, and so we've just got to
So
really
true.
spend more time, even trying to feed ourselves, some good nutrition, and just making sure we're getting the vitamins and the minerals and nutrients we need, because that's going to set us up to thrive long term and be around for our children as they grow up and hopefully get married or have babies, whatever the future holds for them.
Right. Kari, I cannot tell you, I know that, we have just gotten to really get to know you over the last several months, and I know that you're going to be a regular on our show, and just, I want you to know how grateful we are for not only having you on our show, but the ministry that you're providing the world. And I just want you to know how much we appreciate having you on our show, and just God bless you and your ministry.
Oh, well, thank you. I thank the world of both of you. So I'm just so honored to be here, and I just really appreciate you having me on tonight.
Absolutely. And friends, go check out her website, KariKampakis.com. That's KariKampakis.com. Her brand new book, More Than a Mom, How Prioritizing Your Wellness Helps You and Your Family Thrive, is now available everywhere books are sold. As I mentioned earlier, check her out on her social media platforms. Just tremendous practical advice that I know that will benefit all of you. So just definitely do that. We also want to just thank Matushka Trudy for producing tonight's show. We're so grateful for all that she does, and all the great people at Ancient Faith for producing tonight's show. If you've enjoyed the show, do us a favor, friends, share it with your friends and family. It'll be posted on the Louhs Facebook page tomorrow, and you can be able to just to kind of share it, which I know that a lot of you will do, but please just take a moment to share that with any friends and family. And also, as we mentioned earlier at the top of the show, if you're looking for a daily word of encouragement, we encourage you to go to our website at thelouhs.com, click on that subscribe button, and every day you're going to get some practical Christianity, just some inspirational messages that can guide you in your walk of faith. All you have to do is click on that subscribe button, put in your email address, and every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, you'll receive that message. Again, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Hope that you have a blessed evening and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelouhs.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Louhs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with The Louhs is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
Are you curious about the Orthodox Christian faith?
Do you have questions about Orthodox Christianity that you can't trust strangers in internet forums to answer?